Inside the Maze of My Mind, Part 2. I don't remember, I announced in annoyance. I sat in the back seat of Stephen's car, absently flicking a lighter between my shaking fingers. My mind kept going back to the hallway. I couldn't even begin to imagine what other horrible memories were behind those doors. That's why they're closed. I'm not meant to open them. Let's forget this whole thing, I said, but Jimmy and Steve weren't listening. Come on, Red, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He pulled his cap tight over his head until his eyes were concealed by the brim. We could be like Tim Leary, man. We could start a whole new psychedelic revolution based on the fever. Yeah, tune in, tune on, drop down, Stephen added from the driver's seat. I didn't even like it that much, I said. We're going back to where we stopped last night, and then we'll go from there, Stephen explained. How do you know where the spot is? I asked. We parked by a sign that read, Park County 20 miles. Stephen absently flicked the hula girl on his dashboard. I could only nod my head along with the girl. So, what do you say, Red? You still in? Jimmy asked. He patted me hurriedly on the back. I don't think I was ever in, but we'll take that as a yes, Stephen cracked from the front. Let's hurry, though. I don't want to be out there after dark, I negotiated. It was close to 3 o'clock at the time, and I was beginning to have my doubts. I had absolutely no idea how long it took for me to wander into the patch of fever weeds. On mushrooms, time seemed to stretch and warp into a murky film reel. We need to be back before then. Jimmy watched me behind his stained bill. You're probably right. He sat back in the seat and shook out a cigarette. I lit it for him and began to play with the lighter again. Here we are, Stephen announced, pointing at a green roadside sign. I turned to read Park County 20 miles. Stephen pulled a quick U-turn and parked along the side of the road, only yards from the sign. We all got out, and right away I could see our familiar shoe prints in the loose sand and dirt. This is the right place, I said, and a wave of fear struck me. The adventure begins, Jimmy pronounced, drawing deeply from his cigarette. Stephen was popping a fresh joint between his lips, motioning for me to light him up. I did so, and he sucked in heavily. He offered it then to me, which I took with much gratitude. If I was going to hike back into that wasteland again, I would need a pick-me-up. Jimmy took it last, introducing it to the cig already burning between his parched lips. We all exhaled at once, like usual, and gave each other clownish grins. Wait a sec, Jimmy said before reaching into the trunk for the cooler and extracting 2 cool water bottles. With a plump joint alternating between us, we took off into the desert. 2 hours of hiking led us nowhere. The sun bore down on us, and we had already consumed one of the water bottles. Cottonmouth in the desert is no laughing matter. I hung on to the empty bottle just in case there would be an opportunity I could refill it. Jimmy was just about to twist the cap of our last bottle when I smacked his hand swiftly. He nodded and stuck it back into his oversized cargo pocket. Stephen lumbered along behind us, watching his feet. At least it's not as hot, Stephen said, rubbing at his red skin. I'm sure I had even worse of a sunburn. It was pulsing steadily. I eyed my watch and saw it was 5:30. The sun would be extinguished in the next 20 minutes or so. I realized that we would be in pitch black on the return trip, and my heart skipped a beat. We haven't even found the plants yet, I whined tiredly. Should we turn around? Oh, shit! Jimmy screamed in alarm, and Stephen and I jumped where we stood. Jimmy fell back into a thick tangle of brush, his tattered moccasins kicking out into the air. A small tan snake slithered around the bush, disappearing into a hole in the earth. Did you see the size of that thing? Jimmy cried as Stephen and I hauled him back to his feet. It was a big one, all right, Stephen replied with a tired grin. I laughed while Jimmy beat the dust out of his clothes. This isn't funny, Red, he barked. We continued onward, moving slower than ever. We were all exhausted, but we couldn't turn back. We had come so far, and the mysterious weeds were nowhere to be seen. I doubted we would ever find them. The desert got cooler as the sun made its way into the horizon. The sky blew up in a breathtaking streak of pinks and oranges. Then our supply of heat was gone, and my heart sank with the sun. We huddled close to each other as the chilling wind blew past. I watched our world turn black. Our world is a whole different place at night. Everything changes, and a human brain changes too. We all went under a strange transformation as our eyes adapted to the darkness. Every cactus and tall plant became a dark figure. Every scurrying creature became a stranger following our tracks. We should have turned back. Oh God, why didn't we turn back? Our slow, grueling paces switched to cautious staggers. No longer did we have any sense of direction. All we cared about was staying close to one another. We need to turn around, Jimmy said, and I sensed real fear in his voice. I was wrong. I can't do this. I was messed up last night, and my high is gone. We can't turn around, Stephen replied with a small voice. Not after all we've gone through. He's right, Steve, I said, my entire body trembling. A little farther. That was the end of the subject. No one realizes how fucking dark the desert gets at night. My senses did improve out there. I could make out the black shapes of plants and trees, and I could always notice when there was a giant set of thorn bushes in front of me. Every crack of a branch and every chirp from a grasshopper felt like inches away. There was a squeak from what could have been a shrew or a mouse, the sound of a heavy bird taking flight, and then the sharp howl from a wolf. We stopped dead in our tracks at this, each of us breathing heavily. Wolves aren't native here in Nevada, I thought. Could that have been a coyote? Stephen snapped me a quick glance before continuing. He stopped suddenly and bent down on his knees. Red, come here and look at this, Stephen insisted. I bent down next to him and leaned close to the plant. I placed a hand on it and felt the tiny prods of its thorns. I also noticed the plant was too leafy. It was a lot bigger than the weed we were looking for. Is this it? Is this the fever? Jimmy asked desperately. He wanted this trip to be over just as much as I did. No, I said simply. It's a weed, but not ours. Damn it, Stephen snapped, regaining his feet. I heard his joints crack and pop wildly. Let's just turn back. I can hardly see out here, I protested. We're tired, Steve. Let's just call it a night. Stephen turned to me in the black, his eyes like tiny moons. He had his arms crossed, rubbing his bare arms for warmth. I was wearing a hoodie and Jimmy had a sleeved sweatshirt. Stephen wasn't wearing anything but his torn jeans and stained tie-dye shirt. We're close, he announced, his breath clouding out in front of him. You're freezing, Steve. We're freezing, Jimmy snapped. Fine. We'll call it a night, he said, and we sighed in relief. Right here. What? I shouted. We'll camp here in the night and search tomorrow, Stephen replied, sitting against a nearby tree. He bowled his knees in close to his chest and shivered briskly. I can't sleep here, Jimmy argued. All the same, he sat down next to his friend. You can't sleep out here either. You'll freeze to death. It's not that cold. Cut the bullshit, man. It's 20 degrees out here and getting colder, I remarked. There was a crash behind me, and I turned in time to see a bush shake. I instantly thought of the wolf. I've heard that a desert can reach 20 below at night, Jimmy replied. Where'd you hear that? Stephen challenged. There was another sound behind us, something that sounded like a scratch on a tree trunk. I sat down Indian style in front of Steve and locked eyes with him. It's over, I said. He only studied my face and nodded. I smiled and got back to my feet. Jimmy helped Stephen up, and we turned away from the tree. We went back the way we came. I hope we're not lost, Jimmy said. There was a lot of silence between us. We cracked open the second water bottle, and Jimmy and I lent our sweatshirts to Steve for half an hour at a time. I was sorry to be right that it was getting colder. The wind was also harsher, but it was always at our backs. We heard the wolf cry out once more, but it sounded like it was miles behind us. This was so much different last night, Red, Jimmy said, shattering our silence. There were a lot more things to entertain us yesterday. Do you remember the colors? No one answered him, but he knew we both did. It was 7:45, and still we walked. I swigged from the water bottle and passed it back to Jim to hold. I had dropped my bottle a while ago, maybe even when we took that short break against the tree. My eyes sagged and my knees shook. My feet cried in pain with each short step. Snot ran down my nose, dripping off my chin. Prickly weeds tugged at the cuffs of my pants, and I constantly felt as if snakes were coiling past my ankles. Jesus, I could use another diner burger right about now, Stephen said, and I thought I heard his stomach growl. I heard that, Jimmy agreed. Silence followed for another 40 minutes. When my digital watch told me we were rounding past 9 o'clock, I started to panic. 2 hours had passed since we turned around, which told me we were either walking too slowly or that we were hiking in the wrong direction. We should have reached the road by now, Jimmy cried helplessly. I know, I snapped. We only hiked for 2 hours before we turned back. We should be back to the car. I know, I shot back. So what do we do? I began, but my right foot sank into a dip in the desert floor. My ankle turned and I crumpled to the brush. I cried out as razor-sharp thorns bit into my arm. Stephen and Jimmy ran for my aid and hauled me to my feet. Damn, Red, are you okay? Jim asked with concern. Yeah, but my arm's all torn up. I inspected my bare arm and saw familiar gray spines sticking out of my skin. What is it? Stephen asked excitedly. I looked down at my feet and realized that the plants were all around us, the stalks growing as tall as our kneecaps. Gray tendrils of growth stretched out like ropey vines, attaching different families together. Red, what the hell are we looking at? I should have lied. I should have pulled out those thorns, told them it was nothing, and walked away. I should have put it all behind me. It's the plant. Right here, all around us, I said. We found it. I shivered, clutching my shoulders in a bear hug. Yeah, Stephen murmured, plucking one of the stalks out of the ground. Using his fingernails, he pulled each spine from the weed. Then he raised it to his lips. Jimmy and I watched Stephen pop the plant into his mouth like a pill. He puckered his cheeks into a sour face as he sucked. When he felt that he had gotten all it's worth, he spit the plant onto the dirt, gagging wetly. Then he looked up at us, wiping saliva and tears from his face. It tasted awful, he revealed, spitting once more. Then Jimmy bent down onto his knees and selected his own fever weed. He plucked out the thorns and eyed it with unease. He held it up to his open mouth, much like Stephen, but paused. Come on, Jim, just do it, Stephen prodded. The taste doesn't stay in your mouth. That's not what I'm afraid of, Jim replied, looking at me, his eyes full of caution. You don't have to do this, Jimmy, I said in a cloud of my own breath. Don't tell me I'm going to be the only one to try it, Stephen shouted. No, I will, Jim said. He brought the weed closer to his mouth. It's just... What is it? I asked. I was studying the lines on his face, searching for anything I could understand in his eyes. I did find one thing, and it was curiosity. It's just a new drug, I guess, he said with a shrug. Then he placed the plant on his tongue and locked his teeth. I watched terrified as Jimmy sucked out all the fever's poison. He had a familiar screwed-up face, tears running down his cheek. "That a boy, Jim, that a boy," Steve said with a laugh. He patted his buddy on the back as he spit the disgusting weed on the ground. Jim looked at me with a hint of embarrassment. "Maybe this will make things a little more interesting." "Come on, Red, join us," Stephen almost commanded. I sighed and reached down. I snagged off a good piece with a trembling hand. I eased the thorns out, and I took a deep, raspy breath before placing it on my tongue. No one truly knows how black the desert is at night. When the fever finally kicked in, it felt as if my entire body was weighed down with a heavy blanket. Stephen was the first to experience the trip. His eyes glazed over and his entire body shook. I would have tried to aid him, but he was smiling. There was utter bliss on his face. He was whispering under his breath in hushed murmurs. His hands began to rise up in the air, reaching for some unseen force. I watched Stephen as he began to speak. Jimmy, on the other hand, was getting to his feet, eyes rolled up into the back of his head. "Don't you see them, Red?" Stephen said sharply. "Don't you see the eyes?" The responding bark from a wolf resounded over the valley. Jimmy strode over to me, hands reaching out. His eyes were still rolled into whites, and a slack grin hung on his face. He was lost in his own mind, much like I was inside the Mariel motel. "I had a nightmare," Jimmy said in a juvenile voice. "I had a nightmare. Can I sleep with you?" Jimmy laughed, drool spotting his sweatshirt. "Everyone died in my dream." "This was a mistake," I said. I sprang to my feet just as the blanket fell over my shoulders. The desert became a brilliant screen of bright colors. My feet began to sink into the earth, the fever plants coming alive around my ankles. Long gray vines uncoiled from their stalks, snapping out at me. My eyes switched to Stephen, who was only a black figure in the colors. He was up on his feet and wandering out into the desert, hands outstretched as if he was a blind man. The lights in the sky swallowed him like a mist. I tried to run after him, but I lost my footing. Everything seemed to drain out of the world as I fell into a tangle of weeds. Vines wrapped around my body, binding my chest to the ground. Fangs bit into my arms. I must have blacked out for a minute, but I remember regaining my feet and resting up against a tree. It squirmed and bucked under my touch, but I ignored it. I tried to reach out for Jim, but he stretched away as if the ground was made of elastic. The colors were more intense, and my breathing became great heaving gasps. Sweat seeped out of every pore in my body, cool trickles running down my sides. "I quit," Jimmy hollered into the night air. His bug eyes were trained on something in the distance only he could see. His hands went to his face, and he screamed bloody murder. I won't forget the way his entire body trembled. I went to aid him, but again fell flat on my face. It felt like I was trying to walk on one of those bouncy castles I used to love as a kid. Jimmy fell on his knees only yards from me, chin on his chest, saliva pouring from his open mouth. His eyes were wide open, but still rolled back. At that moment I thought his eyes were red, and they were staring right at me. "We fell in love in a fever," Jimmy moaned through his mouth full of saliva. "Hotter than a pepper's sprout." Then he started to laugh, spit spraying between his teeth. Jimmy started to crawl toward me on his hands and knees, cackling wickedly. He howled at me, his eyes still rolled back into their whites. How can he see me like that? I thought. I immediately scrambled away from him, his fingers just grazing my ankle. I kicked at him blindly, and he howled with rage. Then the lights went out. I don't know which direction I ran, but it wasn't the right way. Just like that first night, I ran into the desert, and I was alone. And I was tripping hard. "Red!" I heard Jimmy scream behind me. He sounded distant, his voice only a whisper on the wind. "It's all yours!" A series of bone-chilling chuckles followed this. "It's your call!" Then silence. I started hallucinating just then. Cacti broke out in feverish grins, blood dripping down from sparkling fangs. Saw pieces of the desert floor crack and separate. From the cracks came whispering voices and reaching hands. One of the hands was skeletal and decomposing. Another was a massive wolf's paw, a green beady eye peeking out from the crack. The sky seemed to take shape over my head, and I felt like I was running through a snow globe, a black dome over my head. The voices began to speak again, but in hushed, disorganized whispers. "Mariel fever came tiptoeing through with a meat cleaver. Mariel window can't beat, may creep in, no one knows." "Shut up!" I could hear the wolves behind me grunting and barking. The sky rippled like water. There was a realization that something was piecing itself together in my path, but I was blinded by the moon's reflective glare. I then struck the window into the Mariel motel. I rebounded off the glass, and I fell in a heap. Behind me, a pack of giant wolves were fast approaching over the horizon. The very earth trembled under my hands. This time they were going to kill me. The window was slightly ajar, the warm air from the hallway teasing my face. I grasped the windowsill and tore the window up on its track and clambered inside. On the carpet, I tried to push the window back down. It wouldn't budge. I hung all my weight on the thing, but it remained where it was. I even stepped back and swung the heel of my shoe down on the windowpane. Outside, the wolves howled and whined. They were less than a few miles away, and I couldn't stop them from entering my mind. The Mario window can't be closed. What may creep in, no one knows. I turned to run, but stopped. The hallway was different than the last time I saw it. The wallpaper hung in faded tatters, revealing the rotting plywood beneath. The carpet was pulled up from the ground in some places, and a few of the doors were masked with a foul mold, which seemed to grow before my eyes. After 10 to 15 minutes of running, I heard the shatter of glass behind me and the heavy thumps of my wolves gaining entry. Although I wasn't in my physical body, I was still feeling the influence of the fever, squeezing at my brain with its claw-like fingers. It seemed to go on and off like a light switch. One second the hallway would be spinning in front of me in a nauseous blur, and the next I would be thinking clearly and stepping lively. At one instant the doors began to ooze off the walls like a dripping paint, and I saw eyes sprout up in their places. They were the eyes of the wolves, blinking with recession on the wallpaper. They followed me like the eyes of a painting. Then the fever would fall off me like a wet towel, and the doors would be back where they belonged. The hallway grew worse as I continued past door 200. There was a place where the ceiling had completely caved in, wires hanging out of the gaping hole like dead snakes. A light fixture lay at my feet, its bulb still flickering with life. Not far from that was a gaping trench in the ground, deeper than what my eyes could see. Far behind me I heard the sound of tearing carpet and a high-pitched howl. The doors appeared to hang crooked in their frames, growing moldy beards. The lights dimmed above my head, and there was one instance where I navigated through pitch black, the wallpaper ribbons brushing against me as cold fingertips. Then I came to door 319, and I stopped. This door was not covered in fungi like the others. This door was situated correctly in its frame, and it looked brand new. It was also slightly ajar, sunlight creeping in lazily across the carpet. I reached for the doorknob and swung it open. The bright afternoon sun greeted me. "Remember," a voice whispered from behind me. I stepped through the doorway, and I was in the woods. I looked around with my hands over my eyes for shade. I remembered that forest, and well. I used to hike through there a lot as a boy, pretending that I was a skilled hunter on the prowl for game. I would pick out a good-sized tree branch to be my rifle, and slink my way through the foliage silent as a fox. Remember. That all flooded back to me like a surge of icy cold water. I was only 8 at the time, pretending to be a hunter on the trail of a wild beast. I would dart behind trees, stalking invisible deer or the occasional grizzly bear. I called myself Creepin' Red, I murmured under my breath. The greatest hunter this side of the Amazon. I watched an 8-year-old boy flit past a set of trees to my right. Suddenly, I knew exactly when I was. "Watch out, kid, watch out!" I leapt out for him, but he couldn't hear or see me. 8-year-old Red dodged behind a tree, his rifle close to his chest. His mop of hair hung comically over his eyes, and his little boots were coated in fresh mud. The boy sprang out from behind the tree and skipped across the clearing. He rounded a thick screen of bushes and sod. The boy immediately cried out in surprise, and I knew that Urine was currently spotting his coveralls. I ran up next to my past self and looked into the eyes of the beast. I too screamed. An adult male wolf sat on his haunches only yards from the boy. There was a deep gash across his neck, probably from a scuffle with another wolf. Blood had pooled around his body, staining the dead grass a sickening crimson. He growled at the boy in warning, spittle mixed with blood dripping off its muzzle. He tried to leap at the boy, but was only able to fall over onto its side, chest heaving. His black eyes stared up at us, teeth bared, a dying groan collecting in its throat. The boy backed up, watching the wolf with wide eyes, his mouth hung open in awe. The wolf made one last attempt to get up, and was able to crouch on its haunches again. It growled angrily, tightening into a ball. Its eyes watched the boy as its paws dug into the earth. It gave off a soft bark, fresh blood trickling down its chest. Muscles flexed beneath its coat, his lips pulled back to reveal pink teeth. I knew what was coming next, so I tried to pull the boy away, but my hands passed right through him. I could only watch and relive the scene. Yet I didn't close my eyes. The wolf sprang at the boy, and he screeched, falling over onto his butt. The wolf fell on the kid, its breath filling his face. Its wet fur weighed down the boy's body as claws tore open his coveralls and dug into his soft flesh. Wolf's jaws went for the boy's throat, but he thought fast. He brought the heavy tree branch up to his face, guarding his neck. The wolf fell away onto its side, noticeably weaker. It had already spent its remaining stores of energy. Like clockwork, the boy brought the butt end of his branch up and out in a swooping arc. It struck the wolf across the cranium. The injured wolf tried to claw its way across the clearing, whining in crippled desperation. No, let it be, Red. Please let it be. The wolf ended its escape in a panting heap, eyes glazed and tongue lolling out of its jaw. The boy stood over the dying beast, mouth pulled back in an angry grimace. He held his branch high over his head, his coveralls hanging in tatters. I saw the fury and victory in my own eyes. Saw firsthand the atrocious cruelty emitting off me as I brought the branch down. Came down on the wolf's rib cage, its entire body twanging fiercely. Cried again, but made no attempt to defend itself. The wolf rested its head on the soft soil, eyelids fluttering. The boy bellowed his battle cry and crunched the wolf's skull with the wooden staff. The wolf let out one prolonged groan, and we watched its chest deflate like a punctured balloon. Its paw twitched twice before it fell still. The boy dropped the staff at his feet, watching his kill with glassy eyes. The scrapes on his chest were forgotten as the kid got on his knees to hold the wolf's still paw. It was a long time before the first tear trickled off his chin, and that was followed by a rocking sob. One hand absently patted the wolf's flank. I sat down next to myself, inspecting the dead wolf. It looked so fragile and innocent there in the woods. It looked at peace. My eyes traced the animal's skull, and I noticed the tag clipped to its ear. I crawled closer and examined the small device punched into its left ear. It was maybe only a few centimeters long, and was as wide as my biggest fingernail. The sun shone off its metallic surface, and I could faintly make out something stamped across it. Even after putting my nose inches from the wolf's snout, the words stamped on the tag were blurry. Try to remember, the voice muttered. I shut my eyes tight. In my mind I saw a capital M, but the rest of the name was a black blur. Then a lowercase a stood out in the barrage of mental images. That was followed by a hyphen and a capitalized R. I didn't even have to find the rest of the code to know what I was dealing with. Oh God. Oh no, I gasped. The blur on the tag focused before my eyes. M-A-R-I-A-L. A code. It's a radio tag, I thought conclusively. It's a tracking transmitter for keeping tabs on wildlife. I didn't know what it was when I was 8. I thought it said, Mariel, I cried. There was a howl from just behind me, and I spun around. In the clearing stood a scrawny naked man with a black wolf's head on its shoulders. He was grinning at me, and I saw that it had human teeth. Its eyes weren't green marbles, but they were blue, just like mine. The thing held out a thin hand which held a fever plant by its soiled roots. Hello, Red. Long time no see, the thing said with my voice. I remembered what Jimmy and Stephen had said the other day in the diner. They said they'd heard a voice speaking to them in the desert, and its name was Mariel. Who are you? I asked cautiously. I peeked behind my shoulder to see that the wolf and the boy were gone. Mariel, it said simply. Its wolf head nodded sincerely at me, and I spotted the silver radio tag in its ear. I also noticed the open wound in its head, inflicted by the branch. One side of its snout was caked with dry blood. What are you? I challenged the creature. A memory whose door you could never close, it said. I looked back at the door floating freely in the air. I could make out the hallway, where the overhead light was casting flickering shadows on the wall. There was a howl rising from the depths of the Mariel Motel like a ghost wind. The wolves were closer than ever. I turned back to Mariel and saw that it had gotten even closer to me. I let you in, didn't I? I asked the entity. The first night, you snuck in through the window behind me. I've always been here, Red. You just let the wolves in. It cackled, sending chills up and down my spine. You talk to my friends. When you're stoned, I'm free to come and go as I please, it explained. I found your friends and decided to have a little fun. Unfortunately, I can never remain in your place for more than a moment. I found the road for you, but was sucked back here as punishment. What do you mean, your hallway? These are my memories, I announced. I agree these halls are yours. I'm not staying here anymore. I'm getting out. We're swapping places, Red, it declared. I'm going to climb out the window on the other side, and I'll be able to feel and see and talk. You'll stay here, locked behind this door like you tried to do to me. It spun around swiftly and lunged for the door. I followed suit, sprinting alongside Mariel to the only exit. Mariel reached the door first and got halfway out the doorway. I was able to place a hand on his shoulder, and I wrenched it back in. It was thrown easily out into the forest, where it fell head over heels into the thick underbrush. I grasped the doorknob and went to swing the door shut behind me, but an icy hand caught me on my elbow. It pulled me backward, and I was being ripped out of the hallway. I caught myself before I fell onto my back, but Mariel was already out in the hall, swinging the door shut. Bye, Red, it cried, and the door latched shut in my face. I beat at the door with my balled-up fists. I tried for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. I turned to ram the middle of the door with my shoulders, but it remained solid in its frame. Mariel was already on its way to the end of the hallway, near the door 5823. It'd tear open the window and place itself behind my eyes, posing as me, and using my vocal cords as its own. I gave it a name that day in the forest, just like the plant. Once it had its name, it could manifest itself into that thing. You can try and stop him. A familiar voice spoke from behind the door. He's already close to the window. He knows all the shortcuts. That was followed by an onslaught of childish laughter. How? I asked the voices. These are your memories. You can choose what can be forgotten and what can be remembered. Do you want to remember? Remember what? I asked. The wild wolf you killed in the woods by your father's farm. Do you want to remember the way you cried, or the way you felt like you were the one truly defeated that beautiful summer day? Tears flowed freely down my cheeks. Yes, I said softly. Do you want to remember how you strung the dead beast over your back and carried him all the way home? Yes, I sobbed. Do you want to remember how your father helped you bury it in the fields? Or how your father looked at you after the corpse was buried? How he held your shoulders as you cried? Yes, yes, of course I do, I answered. There was a soft click as the door creaked open. I stared into the hallway through my tears, a smile creeping across my face. I stepped out of the forest and heard the door slam shut behind me with a rattling crash. I turned to see that the door was gone. There was only a bare wall, where a repressed memory had once been stored. You're deathly afraid of wolves, a voice concluded promptly. Yeah, I stopped at the sound of heavy panting. I turned to see a pack of wolves bounding up the hallway, jaws clashing. I turned and ran from their revolving green eyes, head thumping and my heart pounding. I could feel the effects of the fever coursing through my bloodstream. Time seemed to slow and thin out. Colors seemed to come and go, and tears fell off and on down my face.